Marcus Chen stood in front of the mirror, staring at a stranger. The reflection showed a broken man with hollow eyes, wearing clothes that smelled of the streets. His billion-dollar empire felt like a distant dream as he rubbed dirt onto his cheeks. Today, he would become invisible. Today, he would test the one person he thought would never abandon him, his sister, Rebecca. The plan was simple, but the stakes were impossibly high. He needed to know if blood was truly thicker than wealth, because lately he had started to wonder if anyone in his life actually loved him, or just loved what he could provide. The transformation was complete. Marcus Chen, tech billionaire, had disappeared. In his place stood a homeless man named Mark. It had been 3 years since Marcus last saw Rebecca face to face. Their relationship had always been complicated, strained by success and distance. She had married a hedge fund manager and moved to the Upper East Side. They exchanged occasional text messages, mostly about holidays and birthdays, but something felt different in her recent messages, something colder. Marcus had just donated another $50 million to charity, yet she hadn't even acknowledged it. His assistant had mentioned seeing Rebecca at exclusive events, always quick to mention her brother's success to strangers. Was she proud of him, or proud of being associated with him? The question haunted Marcus late at night in his penthouse. Today, he would finally get his answer. The morning air bit through Marcus's thin jacket as he shuffled down Fifth Avenue. People rushed past without a glance, their eyes sliding over him like he didn't exist. This was his new superpower, invisibility. A businessman nearly knocked him over, muttering something about watching where he was going. Marcus felt a strange liberation in being nobody. No one wanted anything from him. No one smiled fakely while calculating what they could gain. He was just another forgotten soul on the city streets. The irony wasn't lost on him that just yesterday these same people would have fought for his attention. He approached the cafe where Rebecca had her standing Tuesday morning appointment. His heart pounded against his ribs. Through the cafe window, Marcus spotted her immediately. Rebecca sat at her usual corner table, perfectly put together in designer clothes. Her diamond earrings caught the morning light, the same ones he had given her last Christmas. She scrolled through her phone with manicured nails, a half-finished latte growing cold beside her. She looked so comfortable, so content in her bubble of privilege. Marcus remembered the girl she used to be, before the money, before the status. They had grown up sharing a single bedroom in their grandmother's tiny apartment. Back then, they had been a team against the world. Now they might as well have been strangers. He took a deep breath and pushed open the cafe door. The test was about to begin. Marcus shuffled toward Rebecca's table, his movements deliberately slow and uncertain. He kept his head down, playing the part perfectly. Other customers shifted uncomfortably, some moving their bags closer. The barista watched him with suspicious eyes. Marcus stopped a few feet from Rebecca's table, close enough to be noticed. She didn't look up. He cleared his throat softly. Still nothing. She remained absorbed in her phone, completely oblivious to his presence. Or perhaps not oblivious at all. Perhaps she was simply choosing not to see him, like everyone else. Marcus felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. He hadn't expected the rejection to sting quite this much. After all, she didn't know it was him. But somehow, that made it worse. "Excuse me, miss," Marcus said, his voice raspy from deliberately not drinking water all morning. Rebecca's eyes flicked up for a split second before returning to her phone. No recognition, no acknowledgement, just a brief moment of annoyance at being interrupted. Marcus pressed on, keeping his voice humble and broken. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I haven't eaten in 2 days. If you could spare anything, even just some change for coffee." He watched her face carefully, searching for any hint of compassion. Her jaw tightened slightly. She shifted in her seat, her body language screaming discomfort. Still, she didn't meet his eyes directly. The silence stretched between them like an ocean. Marcus felt his chest constrict. Rebecca sighed, the kind of dramatic sigh that said she was dealing with an inconvenience. She finally looked up, but her eyes went through Marcus rather than seeing him. There was no warmth there, no kindness, just cold calculation. "The shelter is 3 blocks that way," she said, pointing vaguely toward the door. Her voice carried an edge of irritation. "They serve breakfast until 9. She returned to her phone, clearly considering the interaction over. Marcus stood frozen, shocked by the casual cruelty of her dismissal. This was his sister, the girl who used to share her lunch with stray cats, the woman who had cried watching sad movies. Where had that person gone? He wanted to rip off his disguise right then, but something stopped him. "Please," Marcus continued, pushing the test further. "I just need a couple of dollars. I'm not asking for much." His voice cracked with genuine emotion now. Rebecca's face hardened into something Marcus didn't recognize. She set down her phone with deliberate force. "Look, I don't have cash," she said sharply, "and honestly, you people need to figure things out instead of bothering hard-working citizens." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. You people. As if he was somehow less than human, as if his current appearance erased any claim to dignity or respect. A few other customers glanced over, some nodding in agreement with Rebecca. Marcus felt sick to his stomach, his own sister. Marcus tried one more time, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just asking for help, one human being to another." Rebecca's expression shifted to something between disgust and impatience. She gathered her things quickly, clearly preparing to leave rather than continue the conversation. "You need to leave me alone, or I'll call the manager," she said, loud enough for others to hear. The threat hung in the air between them. Several customers were now openly watching the scene unfold. Marcus saw judgment in their eyes, but none of it directed at Rebecca. They saw a successful woman being harassed by a homeless man. They saw her as the victim of this interaction. The realization crushed something deep inside Marcus's chest. Rebecca stood up, slinging her designer bag over her shoulder. She looked at Marcus one last time, and in that moment he saw complete indifference. Not hatred, not even disgust anymore, just absolute apathy. She simply didn't care. As she walked past him toward the door, she made sure to give him a wide berth, as if poverty might be contagious. The cafe door chimed as she left, and Marcus stood there alone, trembling. Other customers had already returned to their own worlds, the incident forgotten. But Marcus would never forget this moment. His sister had looked at him in his most vulnerable state and felt nothing, absolutely nothing. And that destroyed him more than any business loss ever could. Marcus stumbled out of the cafe, his legs barely holding him upright. The cold morning air slapped his face, but he barely felt it. His mind replayed Rebecca's words on an endless loop. "You people." The phrase echoed in his skull like a death sentence. He had built an empire from nothing, donated millions to help others, revolutionized entire industries. Yet none of that mattered when he appeared before his own sister as someone in need. The disguise had stripped away everything but his humanity, and apparently that wasn't enough. He walked aimlessly down the street, genuinely feeling as lost as he appeared. Other pedestrians parted around him like water around a rock. Marcus had never felt so alone in his entire life. He found himself on a bench in Central Park, surrounded by the early morning joggers and dog walkers. A woman sat down on the other end of the bench, then immediately stood up and moved when she noticed him. Marcus watched her go without reaction. He was getting used to it now, this constant rejection, but nothing compared to Rebecca's coldness. They had shared everything as children, their fears, their dreams, their last bites of food. He remembered when she had pneumonia at age 12, how he had stayed up all night reading to her. He remembered teaching her to ride a bike, catching her every time she fell. Where was that girl now? Had money truly corrupted her so completely, or had she always been capable of this cruelty? Marcus pulled out the cheap burner phone he had bought for this experiment. His fingers hovered over Rebecca's contact, tempted to call her, to reveal the truth, to make her feel the shame she deserved. But something stopped him. The test wasn't over yet. He needed to see more, understand more. One interaction wasn't enough to judge her entire character. Maybe she was just having a bad day. Maybe she had been burned by scammers before. Marcus tried to rationalize her behavior, searching desperately for excuses. Deep down, though, he knew the truth. Her reaction had been too automatic, too practiced. This wasn't an aberration. This was who she had become. Still, he decided to push further. He would give her more chances. By afternoon, Marcus had positioned himself near Rebecca's favorite boutique on Madison Avenue. He knew her schedule perfectly because she posted everything on social media. Sure enough, at exactly 2:30, she emerged from a private car service. Today, she wore a different outfit, equally expensive. She chatted animatedly on her phone, laughing at something. The sound of her laugh used to bring Marcus joy. Now it felt like nails on a chalkboard. He watched her pause at the boutique window, admiring a dress on display. The price tag was probably more than most people earned in a month. Rebecca didn't even glance at it twice before walking inside. Marcus waited a few minutes, then followed her in. The boutique staff immediately tensed when Marcus entered. A security guard took a step forward, hand moving toward his radio. Marcus kept his movements slow and non-threatening, playing the part of someone who had wandered in by accident. He spotted Rebecca near the back, holding up a silk blouse against herself. She looked so carefree, so unburdened by the morning's encounter. Had she already forgotten him completely? Marcus approached slowly, weaving between racks of clothing. He could feel all eyes on him, tracking his every move. The security guard shadowed him closely. When he was about 10 feet from Rebecca, a sales associate stepped directly into his path. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave," she said firmly. Rebecca turned at the commotion, her eyes landing on Marcus. For a brief moment, recognition flickered across her face. Not recognition of her brother, but recognition of the homeless man from the cafe. Her expression immediately shifted to annoyance. "Oh my God, is he following me?" she said to the sales associate, her voice loud and accusing. "He harassed me this morning at my cafe and now he's here?" The sales associate's expression hardened. The security guard moved closer, his hand now definitely on his radio. Marcus felt the situation spiraling, but he held his ground. "I wasn't following anyone," he said quietly. "I just came in to get warm." Rebecca scoffed, a sound of pure disbelief. "That's what they all say," she announced to everyone watching. The security guard grabbed Marcus's arm, not gently. "Let's go, buddy. Now." Marcus allowed himself to be escorted toward the door, but he kept his eyes on Rebecca. She had turned away, already dismissing him again, returning to her shopping. She didn't see the other customers nodding approvingly at his removal. She didn't see the sales associate thanking her for speaking up. She was already back in her world, where people like him simply didn't exist. Marcus was pushed out onto the sidewalk, the boutique door closing firmly behind him. He stood there, breathing hard, feeling a rage building inside him that he had never experienced before. His sister hadn't just rejected him. She had actively worked to have him removed, ejected, erased, and she felt good about it. Marcus walked for hours, his mind a storm of emotions. He passed his own office building, looking up at the top floors where his empire operated. His team was up there right now, making decisions that would affect thousands of lives. Meanwhile, he was down here, invisible and powerless. The contrast was dizzying. He thought about all the conversations he had had with Rebecca over the years about charity and helping others. She had always agreed enthusiastically, always praised his generosity, but it had all been abstract to her. She loved the idea of helping the poor, as long as the poor remained faceless statistics. The moment poverty had a face, her face, stood in front of her asking for help, she had recoiled. Marcus realized with sickening clarity that Rebecca loved being associated with charity more than she actually cared about helping anyone. As evening approached, Marcus found himself outside Rebecca's apartment building. The doorman stood at attention, keeping the undesirable elements at bay. Marcus watched from across the street, hidden in the shadows. He saw Rebecca arrive home, saw the doorman greet her warmly, saw her laugh at something he said. She looked so normal, so kind in that interaction, because the doorman served a purpose in her world. He was useful, respectful, appropriately subservient. Marcus understood now that Rebecca's kindness had always been conditional. She was nice to people who could benefit her or who knew their place in her hierarchy, but someone who needed something from her, someone who had nothing to offer in return. That person was invisible. Worse than invisible. That person was a nuisance to be eliminated. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through Rebecca's social media. Her latest post was from this afternoon, a selfie in the boutique with the caption, "Treating myself after dealing with difficult people today." The comments were full of support and heart emojis. Her followers had no idea she was talking about her own brother. Marcus felt something break inside him, something that could never be repaired. He had lost his sister long before this test. Maybe he had lost her years ago, and only now was he seeing the truth. The woman he had loved, protected and provided for, no longer existed. In her place was a stranger who valued appearances over humanity. Marcus made a decision then, standing in the dark, watching her lit windows. Tomorrow he would reveal himself, but not to reconcile, to show her exactly who she had become. Marcus woke up in a homeless shelter, surrounded by dozens of men in similar circumstances. He had insisted on staying the night here, wanting to fully understand the experience. The reality was harsh. Thin mattresses, the smell of unwashed bodies, constant coughing echoing through the dark. But what struck him most was the humanity he found. The man in the next bunk, Carlos, had shared his extra blanket without being asked. Another man, Thomas, had warned him about which streets to avoid at night. These people, who had nothing, had shown him more kindness in one night than his own sister had shown in 2 encounters. Marcus lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his resolve hardening. Today was day 2 of the test, and he would push even further. Morning came with the harsh fluorescent lights flickering on at 6 a.m. Marcus joined the line for breakfast, accepting a tray of oatmeal and coffee from volunteers. He watched how the volunteers treated each person with dignity, making eye contact, offering genuine smiles. One elderly volunteer, Margaret, touched each person's hand as she served them, a small gesture of recognition. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. When was the last time someone had touched him like that? Not as a billionaire to network with, not as a business opportunity, but as a simple human being. Margaret looked at him warmly. "You take care of yourself today, dear," she said. Marcus could only nod, not trusting his voice. These strangers cared more about him than his own blood. Marcus had researched Rebecca's schedule thoroughly. Today was her weekly charity committee meeting at the Plaza Hotel. The irony was almost too perfect. She would spend the morning discussing how to help the homeless, while refusing to help one standing right in front of her. Marcus positioned himself outside the hotel entrance, sitting on the cold sidewalk with a cardboard sign. He had written simply, "Hungry. Anything helps. God bless." Other homeless individuals had taught him that specific wording worked best. As the well-dressed committee members arrived, most walked past without a glance. A few dropped coins without breaking stride. Then Rebecca appeared, stepping out of another private car. Marcus's heart rate spiked as she approached the entrance. Rebecca walked directly toward him, her heels clicking on the pavement. For a moment, Marcus thought she might actually stop, might actually help, but she stepped around him with practiced ease, her eyes never dropping to meet his. She had perfected the art of looking through people. Marcus called out, his voice intentionally weak. "Please, miss, I'm so hungry." Rebecca froze mid-step, her shoulders tensed visibly. She turned slowly, and Marcus saw genuine anger flash across her face. "Are you kidding me right now?" she hissed, keeping her voice low so others wouldn't hear. "First the cafe, then the boutique, now here. You're clearly targeting me." Her accusation was so absurd, so paranoid that Marcus almost laughed. Almost. "I'm not targeting anyone," Marcus said, maintaining his character. "I'm just trying to survive." Rebecca stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "Listen to me very carefully. If you continue following me, I will call the police and have you arrested for stalking. Do you understand?" The threat was real. her eyes cold and hard. Marcus realized with horror that she genuinely believed he was some kind of predator. Her privilege had so warped her perception that she saw herself as the victim in this scenario. She couldn't conceive of a reality where a homeless person might coincidentally be in multiple places she frequented. In her mind, the world revolved around her, and everyone in it was either useful or threatening. Marcus belonged to the latter category now. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, playing the part of someone backing down. "I didn't mean to upset you. I'll leave." He started to gather his sign and cup, moving slowly. Rebecca watched him with arms crossed, ensuring he actually left. "You should get help," she said. And for a moment, Marcus thought she meant medical help or food. But she continued, "Mental help. There are programs for people like you." The condescension in her voice was staggering. She genuinely believed she was being helpful with this advice. Marcus stood, meeting her eyes for the first time directly. He searched for any flicker of recognition, any hint that she might see her brother beneath the disguise. But there was nothing. She saw exactly what she expected to see, a problem to be eliminated. Marcus walked away, but he didn't go far. He circled around to a coffee shop across the street where he could watch the hotel entrance. Through the window, he saw Rebecca enter the hotel, immediately greeting her committee friends with hugs and air kisses. Within seconds, she was animated and smiling, the confrontation outside already forgotten. Marcus ordered a coffee, and the barista looked at him suspiciously, clearly debating whether to serve him. Marcus pulled out some crumpled bills, and the barista reluctantly took his order. Even this simple transaction was loaded with judgment. He took his coffee to a corner table and watched Rebecca's world continue without him. She had moved on completely, but Marcus couldn't move on. This test was revealing truths he could never unlearn. 2 hours later, the committee meeting ended. Marcus watched the well-dressed attendees emerge, laughing and chatting. Rebecca walked out with another woman, deep in conversation. They stopped right outside the hotel, close enough that Marcus could hear fragments through the coffee shop's open door. "So, we've raised another 100,000 for the homeless initiative," Rebecca was saying proudly. The other woman congratulated her enthusiastically. Marcus felt sick. Rebecca was raising money for the homeless while treating actual homeless people like criminals. The cognitive dissonance was astounding. She wasn't helping people. She was helping her image. The homeless were just props in her story of being a good person. They didn't need to be real to serve that purpose. Marcus made a decision. He left the coffee shop and approached Rebecca one final time in this disguise. She saw him coming, and her face immediately transformed into a mask of fury. "That's it. I'm calling the police," she said, pulling out her phone. "No, wait," Marcus said, dropping the raspy voice slightly. "Rebecca, please." Something in his voice made her pause. She looked at him more carefully, confusion crossing her features. "How do you know my name?" she demanded. Marcus reached up slowly and pulled off the woolen hat covering his hair. He wiped some of the dirt from his face. "Rebecca, it's me," he said quietly. Her eyes widened as recognition finally dawned. The phone slipped slightly in her hand. The color drained from Rebecca's face. "Marcus?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. She looked around frantically, checking if anyone else was witnessing this. Not concern for him, Marcus noted. Concern about being seen. What? What are you doing? Is this some kind of joke?" Her shock was rapidly transforming into anger. Marcus had expected many reactions: shame, horror, apologetic tears. But anger? That caught him off guard. "This is a test," he said simply. "I needed to know if you would help me when I had nothing." Rebecca's expression hardened as understanding crashed over her. She realized what had happened, realized what she had done. But instead of the shame Marcus expected, he saw her face close off completely. "You tested me," she said, her voice rising. "You manipulated me." Marcus stared at his sister in disbelief. "I manipulated you?" he repeated, his voice sharp. "Rebecca, you threatened to have me arrested. 3 times you looked at me and felt nothing." Rebecca's jaw clenched. "That's not fair, Marcus. I didn't know it was you." You can't judge me for how I react to a random homeless person accosting me. The words hung in the air between them like poison. A random homeless person, as if that justified everything. Marcus felt his last thread of hope snap. That's exactly the point, he said quietly. I wanted to see how you treat people when you don't know who they are, when they can't benefit you. Rebecca's eyes flashed with something dangerous. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a harsh whisper. How dare you? Rebecca hissed. You're a billionaire playing dress-up, pretending to understand real struggle. This is offensive, Marcus. Offensive to actual homeless people. She was deflecting, Marcus realized. Turning his test into something problematic so she wouldn't have to face her own behavior. I learned more about compassion in one night at a shelter than you've shown in 3 years, Marcus shot back. Those people with nothing shared what little they had with me. You wouldn't even spare $1. Rebecca's face flushed red. I donate thousands to charity every year, she protested. I'm on 3 different committees. I do more for homeless people than you realize. Marcus shook his head slowly. You donate money to make yourself feel good. But when faced with an actual person in need, you saw trash. Rebecca looked around again, painfully aware they were standing outside a hotel where her social peers might see. Can we please not do this here? She pleaded. For the first time, Marcus heard a crack in her anger. Maybe, he thought, maybe there was still a chance she would understand. Fine, he said. Your apartment, now. Rebecca hesitated, clearly not wanting him in her space looking like this, but she nodded reluctantly. They walked to her building in tense silence. The doorman, who had greeted Rebecca so warmly earlier now, looked at Marcus with open hostility. It's fine, Gregory, Rebecca said quickly. He's with me. Gregory's eyebrows shot up in surprise, but he stepped aside. Marcus caught the judgment in his expression. Even entering the building was a trial. Rebecca's apartment was exactly what Marcus expected. Expensive, pristine, and utterly soulless. Modern art that cost a fortune but meant nothing. Designer furniture that looked uncomfortable. Everything carefully curated to impress visitors. Don't sit on anything, Rebecca said automatically, then caught herself. She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Marcus remained standing in the foyer, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked in this sterile perfection. Rebecca disappeared briefly and returned with a wet towel. Here, clean your face, she said, her tone clipped. Marcus took it, wiping away the carefully applied dirt. They stood there in her gleaming kitchen, 2 siblings who had never been further apart. The silence was suffocating. Finally, Rebecca spoke. What did you expect, Marcus? Rebecca asked, her voice tired now. You showed up looking like that, approaching me in public. Of course I was uncomfortable. Any woman would be. She was still making excuses, still refusing to see it. Marcus set down the towel. Carlos at the shelter shared his blanket with me without asking for anything in return. Margaret, a volunteer, treated every person like they mattered. A guy named Thomas warned me about dangerous streets to keep me safe. These people have nothing, Rebecca, but they have more humanity than you showed me. Rebecca flinched at his words. That's not fair, she said again, but her voice was weaker now. You're my brother. It's different. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. It should be different, he agreed. It should be easier for you to help a stranger, not harder. Rebecca moved to her expensive espresso machine, busying herself with making coffee. Her hands shook slightly. So what now? She asked, not looking at him. You've proven your point. I'm a terrible person. Is that what you wanted to hear? Marcus watched her carefully, trying to understand when she had become so defensive, so incapable of genuine self-reflection. I wanted to hear that you're sorry, Marcus said simply. I wanted to see that you understand what you did. Rebecca spun around, coffee forgotten. What I did? Marcus, you're the one who set up this elaborate scheme to humiliate me. You're the one who manipulated me into a test I didn't know I was taking. Maybe you should be apologizing to me. The audacity of her statement left Marcus speechless for a moment. You threatened to have your own brother arrested, Marcus said, his voice rising despite his best efforts to stay calm. You called me you people. like I was less than human. You posted on social media about dealing with difficult people after treating me like garbage. And somehow I'm the villain here. Rebecca's expression shifted rapidly between emotions: anger, shame, defensiveness, frustration. You don't understand the pressure I'm under, she finally said. Everyone wanting something from me, people approaching me constantly. I've been scammed before. I've had situations where being nice led to people following me, harassing me. I had to develop boundaries. Marcus understood what she was doing, taking real concerns and using them to justify cruelty. It was a neat trick, one that let her sleep at night. Boundaries are healthy, Marcus acknowledged, but there's a difference between boundaries and complete lack of empathy. You didn't just refuse to help me, Rebecca. You were disgusted by my existence. The words finally seemed to land. Rebecca's face crumpled slightly. She sat down heavily on one of her pristine white bar stools. I don't know when I became this person, she admitted quietly. It was the first honest thing she had said. Marcus felt a flicker of hope. When did helping others become something you do for credit instead of because it's right? He pressed gently. Rebecca looked up at him, and for a moment he saw his real sister again, the girl who used to care. But then her face hardened again, the walls rebuilding. Don't psychoanalyze me, Marcus. You're not perfect either. I never claimed to be perfect, Marcus said, but I would never treat another human being the way you treated me. Wealth, poverty, success, failure, none of that should determine someone's worth. Rebecca stood abruptly. Easy for you to say from your ivory tower. You've been rich for so long, you've forgotten what it's like to actually worry about money. Maybe I'm protective of what I have because I remember being poor. Maybe I don't want to enable people who aren't trying hard enough. There it was, Marcus realized. The fundamental belief that poverty was a moral failure, that homeless people deserved their situation, that helping them was somehow enabling weakness. This wasn't just about him. This was about how Rebecca viewed entire populations of struggling people, and it was ugly. Marcus felt exhaustion wash over him, not physical exhaustion, but the bone-deep weariness of realizing a relationship was beyond repair. Do you even remember who we used to be? He asked quietly. How we survived on nothing but each other. How we shared everything because we understood what it meant to have nothing. Rebecca's eyes glistened, the first sign of real emotion breaking through. That's exactly why I can't go back, she whispered. I clawed my way out of that life, Marcus. I can't let myself slip back. Every homeless person I see reminds me how close I came to being them. It terrifies me. Finally, Marcus understood. Her cruelty wasn't about superiority. It was about fear. She saw homeless people as her own worst nightmare, and she needed to distance herself from them to feel safe. But understanding didn't equal forgiveness. Marcus sat down across from Rebecca, suddenly feeling the weight of the past 2 days. I understand your fear, he said carefully, but you've let it turn you into someone who lacks basic compassion. Fear doesn't excuse cruelty, Rebecca. She wiped at her eyes quickly, not wanting to appear weak. So what happens now? She asked. You cut me off? Write me out of your life? Punish me for failing your secret test? There was bitterness in her voice, but also genuine worry. Marcus realized that despite everything, Rebecca still valued their connection. Not for emotional reasons, but for practical ones. He was her safety net, her access to a world of wealth and privilege. Losing him would mean losing status. The realization was another knife to his heart. I don't know what happens now, Marcus admitted honestly. Part of me wants to walk away and never look back. But you're my sister. We're all each other has left of our family. Rebecca's expression softened slightly at the reminder. Their parents had died years ago, leaving just the two of them. Marcus had thought that bond meant something unbreakable. He was learning how wrong he had been. I need you to really hear me, Rebecca. Not defensively, not with excuses. Can you do that? She nodded slowly, though her body language remained guarded. Marcus took a deep breath. You have become the kind of person who judges human worth based on appearance and social status. That's not who we were raised to be. Rebecca opened her mouth to protest, but Marcus held up his hand. "Let me finish. You say you're terrified of becoming homeless again, and I believe you. But that fear has poisoned you. You've convinced yourself that poor people deserve their poverty, because otherwise you'd have to face the truth, that circumstances, not character, often determine who succeeds and who struggles. You need to believe you earned everything through pure merit, because admitting luck played a role would mean accepting you could lose it all." Rebecca stared at him, her face pale. "That's not—" she started. "It is," Marcus interrupted firmly. "And until you face that, you'll keep treating people like you treated me, like they're disposable, like they're less than human." The silence stretched between them, heavy and uncomfortable. Rebecca stood and walked to her floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. "You think you're so enlightened," she said quietly, "but you don't know what it's like to be a woman in this city, constantly approached, constantly having to defend your space. You don't know the fear of being followed, of not knowing if someone is really homeless or dangerous." Marcus joined her at the window. "You're right. I don't know that fear," he acknowledged, "but I do know the difference between caution and contempt. You weren't just protecting yourself, Rebecca. You were disgusted by me. There's a difference." She didn't respond, her jaw working silently. "I saw your social media post," Marcus continued, "about treating yourself after dealing with difficult people. You turned our encounter into content, into a story where you're the victim. Do you even realize how twisted that is?" Rebecca spun to face him, anger flashing again. "You're judging me for one post? You don't see everything I do. You don't see the donations, the committee work, the—" "Performance?" Marcus interrupted. "It's all performance, Rebecca. You love the appearance of helping, but when confronted with actual need, you recoil. You've turned charity into a hobby that makes you look good without requiring you to actually care about people." The accusation hung between them. Rebecca's face contorted with emotion, cycling through anger, shame, and something that might have been recognition. "Maybe you're right," Rebecca finally whispered, her voice breaking. "Maybe I have become someone I don't recognize. But you have no idea how hard it is to maintain this life, Marcus. Everyone expects so much. My husband's family, my social circle, everyone. There's constant pressure to appear perfect, to never show weakness. If I start giving money to every person who asks, where does it end? When am I allowed to say no?" Marcus felt a strange mixture of sympathy and frustration. "You're allowed to say no," he said gently, "but there are ways to decline that preserved dignity. You could have said, 'I'm sorry, I can't help today,' and kept walking. Instead, you dehumanized me. That's the issue." Rebecca nodded slowly, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," Rebecca said, the words barely audible. "I'm so sorry, Marcus. You're right about all of it. I've become someone I hate." She collapsed onto her designer couch, sobbing. Marcus watched her, feeling strangely hollow. He had wanted this moment, wanted her to understand and apologize. But now that it was happening, it didn't fix anything. The damage was done. He had seen who she truly was beneath the surface, and that knowledge couldn't be erased. "I need time," Marcus said quietly. "Time to process this. Time to figure out if we can rebuild any kind of relationship." Rebecca looked up at him, mascara running down her face. "Please don't give up on me," she begged. "I can change. I will change." Marcus wanted to believe her. He desperately wanted to believe that this moment of clarity would transform his sister back into the person she used to be. But he had built a business empire on reading people, on understanding behavior patterns, and everything he knew told him that real change was rare. People usually reverted to their default settings once the moment of crisis passed. "I hope you mean that," Marcus said, "but wanting to change and actually changing are different things." He moved toward the door, needing to leave this pristine apartment that felt like a museum to emptiness. Rebecca stood quickly. "What do I do?" she asked desperately. "How do I fix this?" Marcus paused at the door, considering. Start by volunteering at that shelter I stayed at. Not for photo opportunities. Actually serve people. Look them in the eyes. Learn their names. Actually work with the populations you claim to help through your committees, Marcus continued. Stop treating charity like a networking opportunity and start treating it like a responsibility. And maybe, just maybe, examine why you need to feel superior to people who are struggling. Rebecca nodded, writing down the shelter address as Marcus recited it. Will you check in on me? She asked quietly. Will you see if I'm actually doing it? Marcus met her eyes. No, he said firmly. You need to do this for yourself, not for me. Not to pass another test or to get back in my good graces. Do it because you've realized you've lost part of your humanity and you want it back. The words were harsh, but necessary. Rebecca flinched, but nodded in understanding. Marcus left Rebecca's apartment and stepped back into the evening air. He was still wearing the homeless disguise, and immediately a woman walking her dog crossed the street to avoid him. The test wasn't over, Marcus realized. It would never really be over. He had learned something fundamental about human nature, about how quickly people judge and dismiss based on appearance, about how comfortable cruelty becomes when it's directed at people society has deemed acceptable to ignore. He walked slowly back toward his penthouse, processing everything. Tomorrow he would return to being Marcus Chen, billionaire, but he would never forget these 2 days. Never forget the kindness of strangers who had nothing. Never forget the cruelty of his sister who had everything. Most importantly, never forget how invisible he had become the moment he appeared to have nothing to offer. 3 weeks passed. Marcus returned to his normal life, but nothing felt normal anymore. Board meetings felt hollow. Charity galas felt performative. He found himself watching how people treated service workers, janitors, delivery people. The patterns were everywhere once you knew to look for them. People were kind to those who could benefit them and dismissive of those who couldn't. It was a depressing revelation that colored every interaction. His assistant noticed his distraction during meetings. His CFO commented that he seemed different, darker somehow. Marcus couldn't explain that he had seen behind the curtain of human nature and couldn't unsee it. He hadn't heard from Rebecca since that day in her apartment. He wondered if she had taken his advice or simply moved on, relieved to avoid further confrontation. Then, on a Wednesday morning, Marcus received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "You should see this." It was from Margaret, the shelter volunteer who had served him breakfast with such kindness. Attached was a photo of Rebecca, unmistakably his sister, serving food at the shelter. She wore simple clothes, no makeup, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. But what struck Marcus most was her expression. She was looking at an elderly man as she handed him a tray, and her face showed genuine attention, not pity, not disgust, but actual human connection. Marcus stared at the photo for a long time. Could people really change? Or was this just another performance, another way for Rebecca to prove something? Marcus decided to see for himself. The following Tuesday, he returned to the shelter, this time as himself. Clean clothes, expensive watch, the armor of wealth back in place. The difference in how he was treated was immediate and stark. The security guard greeted him warmly. Staff members approached with eager smiles, clearly recognizing him as someone important. Margaret spotted him and waved, her expression brightening. "Mr. Chen, how wonderful to see you again. Are you here to check on our programs?" Marcus smiled at her gentle way of not revealing his previous visit. "Something like that," he said. "I heard my sister has been volunteering here." Margaret's face lit up. "Oh, Rebecca, yes, she's been coming 3 times a week. She's wonderful with the residents." Marcus asked if he could observe without announcing his presence. Margaret understood immediately and led him to a small office with a window overlooking the dining area. From there, Marcus watched his sister work. She moved between tables, refilling coffee, clearing trays, but more importantly, talking to people, really talking to them. He saw her laugh at something an older woman said. He saw her crouch down to eye level with a man in a wheelchair, listening intently to his story. There was no phone out for photos, no sense of her performing for an audience. Could this be real? Marcus felt hope and skepticism warring inside him. He needed to know if this transformation was genuine or just an elaborate show for his benefit. After an hour, Rebecca took a break, stepping outside for air. Marcus followed, keeping his distance. She didn't notice him at first, too absorbed in her own thoughts. She sat on a bench, her shoulders sagging with exhaustion. Marcus approached quietly. "Hard work, isn't it?" he said. Rebecca jumped, spinning around. When she saw him, a complex series of emotions crossed her face. Surprise, shame, hope, fear. "Marcus," she breathed. "I didn't know you were here." They stood awkwardly, the 3 weeks of silence stretching between them. "Margaret emailed me," Marcus explained. "Showed me you've been coming regularly." Rebecca nodded slowly. "I have been. 3 times a week, like you suggested." Her voice was tentative, uncertain how he would respond. Marcus sat down on the bench, leaving space between them. Rebecca joined him, maintaining the distance. "Why?" Marcus asked simply. Rebecca took a long breath before answering. "At first, I came because I was terrified of losing you," she admitted. "I thought if I did what you said, you'd forgive me, and everything would go back to normal. But something happened around the 2nd week." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I met a woman named Diane. She was a teacher before she lost her job and apartment. We talked for hours. She reminded me so much of Mom." Rebecca's voice cracked, "and I realized I had been looking at all these people as problems or threats. But they're just people. People who had bad luck or made mistakes or got knocked down by life." Marcus listened without interrupting, trying to gauge her sincerity. "There's a veteran named James who served 3 tours," Rebecca continued. "He has PTSD and can't hold down a job. A single mother named Crystal, whose husband emptied their accounts and disappeared. A kid named Tyler, who aged out of foster care with nowhere to go. Every person here has a story, Marcus, and none of them are simple morality tales about laziness or bad choices." Tears streamed down her face now. "I've been so blind, so cruel. I convinced myself that poverty was something that happened to other people because they weren't trying hard enough. Because if I believed that, then I could believe I was safe, that I had earned my security and could never lose it." "And now?" Marcus asked quietly. Rebecca met his eyes directly for the first time. "Now I realize how fragile everything is. How close we all are to disaster. How many successful people are just 3 bad months away from losing everything. And I realize that treating people with dignity isn't about whether they deserve it. It's about recognizing our shared humanity." She wiped her tears. "I'm not telling you this to win you back, Marcus. I'm telling you because I need you to know that you destroyed me in the best possible way. You shattered the comfortable illusions I had built around myself, and I'm trying to rebuild into someone better." Marcus felt his own eyes burning. This felt real. This felt like his actual sister speaking, not the person she had become. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Rebecca said. "What I did was unforgivable. I looked at you, my own brother, and felt nothing, worse than nothing. I wanted you gone. I saw you as less than human." Her voice shook with the weight of her confession. "I've had to sit with that. Really sit with how completely I failed as a human being, as a sister, as someone who claims to care about helping people. The charity committees, the donations, all of it was just ego. I wanted credit for being good without actually having to be good." Marcus reached over and took her hand. She gripped it like a lifeline. "I can see you're trying," he said gently. "Real change is possible, but it's hard. The question is whether you'll keep doing this when it gets uncomfortable." Rebecca nodded. "I know, and I won't lie. There are days I don't want to come, days when my old thoughts creep back in. But then I think about you, standing in that cafe, hungry and asking for help, and how I looked right through you. I think about how easily I could have been the one needing help instead of giving it, and I force myself to show up." She squeezed his hand. "I've also started therapy. Real therapy, not just complaining about stress. I'm working on my fear of poverty, my need for status, all of it. It's painful, Marcus, but necessary." Marcus pulled her into a hug, feeling her sob against his shoulder. "I'm proud of you," he whispered, and he meant it. The journey wasn't over, but at least she had started walking the right path. Over the following months, Marcus watched his sister's transformation continue. It wasn't perfect or linear. There were setbacks and moments when her old attitudes surfaced, but she kept showing up. She quit 2 of her 3 charity committees, the ones that were purely social, and focused her energy on actual direct service. Her social media changed too. Instead of carefully curated selfies with vague, charitable captions, she posted stories about the people she met, always with their permission, always centering their humanity rather than her generosity. Her wealthy friends didn't quite know what to make of this new Rebecca. Some drifted away, uncomfortable with her newfound authenticity. Others, surprisingly, were inspired to examine their own relationship with service and privilege. Marcus found himself joining Rebecca at the shelter sometimes, working side by side with his sister, serving meals and listening to stories. He felt pieces of their relationship rebuilding, but it was different now. There was a depth that hadn't existed before, forged through crisis and genuine change. They talked about their childhood more honestly, acknowledging how their fear of poverty had shaped them both in different ways. Marcus realized he had his own blind spots. His wealth had insulated him from daily struggles in ways he hadn't fully appreciated. Testing Rebecca had taught him as much about himself as it had revealed about her. They were both learning, both growing, both trying to be better than they had been. One evening, Rebecca invited Marcus to dinner at her apartment. He almost declined, remembering the sterile perfection of his last visit. But when he arrived, he noticed changes. The coldly expensive art had been replaced with photographs of real moments and people. The pristine white furniture now had colorful throw pillows that looked actually comfortable. Fresh flowers from a street vendor, not an expensive arrangement, brightened the kitchen. "I've been making the space feel more human," Rebecca explained, noticing his surprise. "Turns out living in a museum was making me act like a curator instead of a person." They cooked together, something they hadn't done in years. As they chopped vegetables and stirred pots, the conversation flowed naturally, easily, like it used to. Over dinner, Rebecca shared something that had been weighing on her. "I told Daniel about what happened," she said quietly. Daniel was her husband, someone Marcus had always found superficial and status-obsessed. "How did he react?" Marcus asked carefully. Rebecca's expression was complicated. "Not well," she admitted. "He thinks I'm having some kind of breakdown. He's embarrassed by my volunteering, says it's beneath us. He actually suggested that if I want to help, I should just write bigger checks and stop getting my hands dirty." She paused, pushing food around her plate. "I think my marriage might be ending, Marcus. I'm changing, and he's not. We want different things now. We might have always wanted different things, but I was too caught up in the lifestyle to notice." And Marcus reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "I'm sorry," he said sincerely, "but I'm also proud of you for choosing authenticity over comfort." Rebecca smiled sadly. "It's terrifying. Leaving him means losing the security I've been so desperate to maintain. His family's wealth, our social position, all of it. I'll be okay financially, but I won't be in that world anymore. And part of me is still scared." She looked up at Marcus. "But a bigger part of me knows that world was poisoning me. I'd rather be alone and genuine than coupled and empty." Marcus squeezed her hand. "You won't be alone. You have me, and you have all the people at the shelter who have come to genuinely care about you, not what you can provide." The conversation shifted to Marcus's own life changes. "I've been restructuring how my company approaches corporate responsibility," he explained. "We're implementing a program where every executive has to spend 1 week per year working directly with the communities our products impact. No photo ops, no press releases, just actual work and listening." Rebecca's eyes lit up with interest. "How's that going?" Marcus laughed. "About as well as you'd expect. Some people get it immediately. Others complain that it's beneath their pay grade. Those are the ones who probably need it most. He paused, considering. Your test destroyed me, but it also woke me up. I realized I had surrounded myself with yes men and people who only saw dollar signs. I was isolated in my own way. As the evening wore on, they moved to Rebecca's balcony, looking out over the city lights. Do you ever regret it? Rebecca asked. The test? Putting yourself through that? Marcus thought carefully before answering. No, he said finally. It was painful, and it exposed truths I didn't want to face, but it was necessary. For both of us. You needed to see who you had become, and I needed to understand how society treats people based purely on appearance and perceived value. We were both living in bubbles, just different kinds. Rebecca nodded slowly. I hate that it took such an extreme measure for me to see clearly. But I'm grateful you cared enough to show me, even knowing I might never forgive you for it. That took courage. There's something I never told you, Marcus said, his voice thoughtful. After I revealed myself to you that day, I kept the disguise on and walked home. The whole way, people treated me exactly how you had, like I was invisible at best, threatening at worst. But there were moments of kindness too. A kid, maybe 7 years old, gave me his cookie. An elderly man nodded respectfully as we passed. A woman asked if I needed directions to the shelter, genuinely trying to help. Those small acts of dignity from strangers meant everything. He turned to Rebecca. That's what you're doing now at the shelter. You're seeing people, really seeing them. And that matters more than any check you could write. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. I saw Diane yesterday, she finally said. The woman I told you about, the former teacher, she got a job, a real job with benefits. She starts next week, her voice filled with genuine joy. She'll be moving into subsidized housing next month. She's going to make it, Marcus. And I got to be part of her journey, even in a small way. That feeling is so different from writing a check and getting a plaque on a wall. It's real. Marcus saw his sister's face glowing with authentic happiness, the kind that comes from connection rather than achievement. This was who Rebecca was supposed to be, who she maybe always had been, underneath the armor of fear and status. His test had destroyed the false version of his sister, but it had also revealed the real one. As Marcus prepared to leave, Rebecca hugged him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not giving up on me, for showing me the truth even when it was brutal, for giving me the chance to become someone I can respect." Marcus held her close. "You did the hard part," he reminded her. "You chose to actually change instead of just feeling bad. That's rare." They stood there on the balcony, two siblings who had journeyed through darkness and come out different on the other side. The test had destroyed Rebecca's false self, exposing cruelty and emptiness. But from those ruins something genuine was being built. Not perfect, not finished, but real. And real, Marcus had learned, was worth more than any amount of wealth or status. It was worth everything. 6 months after the test, Marcus stood before his company's board of directors with an unusual proposal. He wanted to establish a foundation that would be run differently from typical charitable organizations. Instead of the wealthy deciding what poor communities needed, those communities would have voting power in how funds were distributed. Board members shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't how things were done. "With all due respect, Marcus," one board member said carefully, "these people don't have experience managing large budgets. It's inefficient." Marcus smiled, recognizing the same attitude Rebecca had once displayed. "Then we'll provide training and support," he replied firmly. "But the decisions will be theirs. We're funding solutions, not imposing them." The proposal passed, barely, but it passed. Marcus's test had changed more than just his relationship with Rebecca. Rebecca's marriage officially ended on a rainy Tuesday in October. The divorce was ugly, with Daniel's lawyers painting her as unstable, her volunteer work presented as evidence of a breakdown. His family rallied around him, offering statements about how Rebecca had changed, become unreliable, abandoned her social responsibilities. Reading the legal documents felt like reading about a stranger. "They're not entirely wrong," Rebecca told Marcus over coffee. I did change. I did abandon those responsibilities. I just don't see those things as bad anymore. She looked tired but peaceful. Daniel gets to keep the apartment, most of the investments, the social circle, and I'm weirdly okay with it. Those things were his anyway. I was just borrowing them, pretending they made me happy. Marcus helped Rebecca move into a smaller apartment in a less fashionable neighborhood. It was a fraction of the size of her previous home, but Rebecca decorated it with care and personality. Photos from the shelter covered one wall. Diane on her first day of work, James smiling with his therapy dog, Crystal with her kids at a playground. These are my people now, Rebecca said, arranging the photos. Not because they need me, but because they see me, the real me. Marcus understood completely. The test had taught them both that authentic connection mattered more than impressive connections. Rebecca's new apartment had old furniture and mismatched dishes, but it felt more like a home than her previous showplace ever had. She had traded comfort for authenticity and found the exchange worthwhile. One day, Rebecca called Marcus with unusual excitement in her voice. "Remember Carlos? From the shelter, the one who shared his blanket with you?" Marcus remembered vividly. Carlos had been one of the first people to show him kindness during the test. "He's starting a support group for veterans experiencing homelessness," Rebecca continued, "and he asked if I would help with organizing and funding." "Marcus," he asked me, like I was someone whose help actually mattered, not just someone whose money mattered. The distinction was crucial, Marcus knew. Rebecca was learning the difference between being useful and being used. "That's amazing," Marcus said warmly. "What did you tell him?" Rebecca laughed. "I told him yes, obviously. We're meeting tomorrow to start planning." Marcus decided to attend the planning meeting, curious to see how Rebecca navigated this new role. The meeting was held in the shelter's community room, a far cry from the elegant conference rooms where Rebecca used to spend her time. Carlos led the discussion with natural authority, his lived experience giving him credibility that no degree could match. Rebecca sat quietly, taking notes, asking thoughtful questions, but never trying to take over or impose her ideas. Marcus watched her defer to Carlos and other veterans, recognizing their expertise about their own needs. This was leadership through service, not ego. When Rebecca did speak, offering to help with specific logistical challenges, she did so humbly. "If you think this approach would work, I'm happy to help implement it," she said. Not, "I think you should do this." The difference was everything. After the meeting, Carlos pulled Marcus aside. "Your sister is the real deal," he said simply. "I've seen a lot of rich people come through here, wanting to feel good about themselves. They stay for a week, take their photos, and disappear. Rebecca's different. She shows up, she listens, she doesn't try to save us, just supports us in saving ourselves." Marcus felt emotion well up. This validation from someone who had lived through struggle meant more than any business award ever could. "She wasn't always like this," Marcus admitted. Carlos nodded knowingly. "Most people aren't. Take something big to wake folks up. Question is whether they stay woke or go back to sleep." Rebecca's staying woke. The informal blessing felt sacred somehow, a recognition that Rebecca had truly changed. That evening, Marcus and Rebecca walked through Central Park, the same park where Marcus had sat broken after their cafe encounter. So much had changed since that day. "Carlos said something that made me think," Rebecca mused, "about staying awake versus going back to sleep. I'm terrified, Marcus. Terrified that one day I'll slip back into old patterns. That I'll start valuing status over substance again. That I'll forget how it felt to see you standing there and feel nothing." Marcus understood the fear intimately. Change was fragile, especially when the world constantly pulled you toward old, comfortable patterns. "That's why you keep showing up," he said. "Why you surround yourself with people who keep you honest. Why you've built a life that reflects your values instead of your fears." They stopped at the same bench where Marcus had rested during his test. Sitting there now, clean and wealthy, Marcus marveled at how different the world looked depending on where you stood in it. "I've been thinking about doing another test," Marcus said carefully. Rebecca's eyes widened with alarm. Not on you, he quickly clarified. On myself. I want to spend a month living on minimum wage, working regular jobs, experiencing what millions of people deal with daily. No safety net, no access to my accounts. Just see if I can survive. Rebecca was quiet, processing. That's intense, she finally said. But I get it. The test changed everything for both of us. You need to keep challenging your assumptions. Marcus nodded. Want to join me? He asked. Rebecca laughed, then realized he was serious. You really think I'm ready for that? I think it would be the ultimate proof that your change is real, Marcus said honestly. Not for me, not for anyone else. For you. To prove to yourself that you can handle struggle without losing your humanity. Rebecca stared out at the park, wrestling with the idea. Marcus could see fear and excitement warring in her expression. Okay, she finally said, but we do it in a different city. Somewhere we're not known. No chance of accidentally being recognized or helped because of who we really are. Marcus felt a surge of pride. 6 months ago, his sister would have laughed at this idea, would have listed 100 reasons why it was beneath her. Now she was volunteering for discomfort, actively seeking opportunities to challenge herself and grow. The transformation wasn't complete, might never be complete, but it was real and ongoing. They spent the next hour planning the details of their upcoming experiment. What city to choose, what jobs to apply for, how to document the experience without exploiting the people they'd meet. We need to be careful, Rebecca said thoughtfully. There's a fine line between learning and poverty tourism. We need to go in with humility, ready to listen and learn, not with assumptions about what we'll discover. Marcus was impressed by her awareness. The Rebecca from 6 months ago would never have considered these nuances. We'll donate everything we earn during that month to causes supporting low-wage workers, Marcus suggested. And maybe we'll discover ways my company can better support our own lowest-paid employees. Rebecca nodded enthusiastically. The test that had destroyed their relationship was evolving into a shared journey toward greater understanding. They were becoming allies in awareness, partners in growth. The destruction had been necessary for reconstruction. 2 weeks later, Marcus and Rebecca arrived in Cleveland, Ohio, carrying nothing but backpacks with basic clothes and $50 each. They had rented a room in a low-income boarding house, the kind with shared bathrooms and paper-thin walls. Their first morning, they stood in line at a temp agency, surrounded by people desperate for work. An older man behind them coughed constantly, clearly sick but unable to afford missing a day's wages. A young woman bounced a crying baby on her hip, filling out applications with her free hand. Rebecca's eyes met Marcus's, and he saw recognition there. This was real life for millions. No safety net, no cushion, just the daily grind of survival. They had entered a world where one missed paycheck could mean homelessness, where getting sick was a financial catastrophe. Marcus got assigned to a warehouse job, overnight shift, loading trucks. The work was brutal, physically demanding in ways he hadn't experienced since his early 20s, building his first startup. His manager was a hard man who made it clear that workers were disposable, that complaining meant unemployment. Marcus watched men in their 50s doing work that was destroying their bodies because they had no other options. During a brief break, he talked with a co-worker named Jerome, who worked 3 jobs to support his disabled wife. Been doing this for 12 years, Jerome said, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Some people work hard their whole lives and still can't get ahead. That's the secret they don't want rich folks to know. Rebecca found work at a fast food restaurant, minimum wage, maximum stress. The manager was a woman barely older than Rebecca, who had been promoted to her position after 8 years of service. She ran the store with military precision because corporate gave her no choice. Understaffed and overworked, the employees moved in constant motion, no time for breaks despite laws requiring them. Rebecca's feet ached after the first 2 hours. By the end of her first shift, she could barely stand. A co-worker named Lisa, a single mother of 3, noticed her struggling. "First day?" Lisa asked sympathetically. When Rebecca nodded, Lisa shared her pain medication. "You'll get used to it. Takes about a week for your body to adjust. Then it just hurts all the time instead of wanting to die. That night, Marcus and Rebecca collapsed in their tiny room, every muscle screaming. The boarding house was loud, with arguments echoing through walls, someone's television blaring until 3 a.m., the smell of various cooking mixing with mildew and old cigarette smoke. "This is one day," Rebecca said quietly, staring at the water-stained ceiling. "One day, and I'm destroyed. These people do this every day, for years, for decades. How?" Marcus understood her question perfectly. The physical exhaustion was manageable, but the existential exhaustion, knowing this was your life with no end in sight, that was the real burden. "Because they have no choice," he answered. "We get to leave after a month. They don't." The privilege of their experiment felt obscene suddenly, but also necessary. They needed to understand. Days blurred together. Wake up exhausted. Work until more exhausted. Collapse. Repeat. Marcus learned about the invisible systems that kept poor people poor, banking fees for having low balances, higher prices at the only grocery store in walking distance, predatory check-cashing services because regular banks wouldn't serve this neighborhood. Everything cost more when you were poor, a brutal irony. He watched Jerome cash his paycheck and immediately lose 15% to fees. "Why not use a regular bank?" Marcus asked before he could stop himself. Jerome laughed bitterly. "Banks charge $30 a month if your balance drops below 500. I never have 500. Check cashing is cheaper." The system was designed to extract from those who had least. Marcus had known this intellectually. Living it was different. Rebecca discovered the social dynamics of poverty that outsiders never see. Her co-workers shared food when someone couldn't afford lunch. They covered shifts when someone's kid got sick. They loaned money that might never be repaid. There was a network of mutual support that sustained people through impossible circumstances. But there was also tension, stress-induced conflicts, the desperation of people pushed too far. She watched a fight break out over a stolen sandwich from the break room fridge, watched the manager fire both people involved because corporate had zero-tolerance policies, watched two families lose income because someone was hungry and someone else was protective of their property. There were no simple victims or villains here, just people trying to survive a system designed to grind them down. By the second week, Marcus got sick. A cold that would normally be a minor inconvenience became a crisis. He couldn't afford to miss work, couldn't afford a doctor visit, couldn't even afford proper cold medicine. He worked through fever and chills, his performance suffering, his manager threatening termination. Jerome brought him homemade soup his wife had made. "On the house," he said, refusing Marcus's offer to pay. "Somebody helped us once when we needed it, passing it forward." Marcus was moved to tears by this kindness from someone who had nothing to spare. He thought about Rebecca at the cafe, about how easily she had dismissed his request for help. He understood now in his bones what that rejection really meant. It wasn't just about money, it was about seeing someone's humanity and choosing to ignore it. Rebecca experienced her own crisis when she got her first paycheck. After 2 weeks of brutal work, she netted barely $300. She stared at the check in disbelief. This wasn't even enough to cover rent and food for 2 weeks, much less utilities, transportation, healthcare, everything else life required. "How do people survive on this?" she asked Lisa in genuine confusion. Lisa shrugged. "We don't survive. We just don't die yet. Big difference." The casual despair in her voice was devastating. Rebecca realized that minimum wage wasn't a living wage. It was a dying wage, just in slow motion. People worked full-time, did everything right, and still couldn't afford basic necessities. The bootstraps narrative was a cruel joke played on people whose boots had holes in them. Marcus and Rebecca met during overlapping breaks in their third week, sharing a cheap meal at a food truck. They had both lost weight, gained shadows under their eyes, developed a bone-deep weariness that sleep couldn't touch. "I want to quit," Rebecca admitted quietly. "Every morning I wake up and remember we can end this any time, that we're choosing this. And I feel guilty for wanting to quit because everyone around me doesn't have that choice. Marcus nodded, feeling the same conflict. But that guilt is important, he said. It means we're really seeing them, really understanding what we're asking of millions of people. We expect them to smile through this, to be grateful for poverty wages, to work harder if they want better lives. It's cruel, Rebecca. The whole system is designed to be cruel. That night they made a decision. They would complete the full month as planned, but afterward, everything would change. Marcus would restructure his company's lowest-tier wages, implement better benefits, ensure no one working for him lived in poverty. Rebecca would use her growing platform at the shelter to advocate for policy changes, to bring her wealthy former friends face to face with the realities of low-wage work. The test had evolved beyond personal transformation. It had become a moral imperative. They couldn't unsee what they had seen, couldn't unknow what they now knew. Their destruction had been necessary, painful, and ultimately transformative. But the real work was just beginning. Understanding wasn't enough. Action was required, and they were finally truly ready to act with both humility and urgency. The final week arrived with bittersweet awareness. Marcus and Rebecca had survived, but barely, and only because they knew it was temporary. On their last Friday, Marcus's warehouse held a small gathering for another worker who was retiring after 40 years. Frank was 67. His body bent from decades of manual labor, retiring with almost nothing because the company had eliminated pensions years ago. His co-workers had pooled money for a modest gift card. Marcus watched Frank's eyes well up at this small kindness, thanking everyone profusely for something that cost less than Marcus spent on coffee in a normal week. The injustice of it burned in Marcus's chest. Frank had given 4 decades to backbreaking work and was being sent off with a $100 gift card and a handshake. At Rebecca's restaurant, the reality was even harsher. Her manager, Sandra, mentioned casually that she couldn't afford her daughter's asthma medication this month. "I'll figure it out," Sandra said with practiced resignation. "Always do." Rebecca wanted to scream, to reveal who she really was and solve the problem immediately. But that would defeat the purpose of the experiment. Instead, she asked questions, learning that Sandra made barely more than minimum wage despite her management responsibilities, that she worked 60 hours weekly but was classified part-time to avoid giving her benefits, that she had been promised a raise for 3 years that never materialized. The system wasn't just failing people, it was actively exploiting them, extracting maximum labor for minimum compensation, then blaming them for struggling. On their final day, Marcus and Rebecca gathered with the friends they had made over the month. Jerome, Lisa, Sandra, and others who had shown them kindness despite having nothing to spare. They shared a potluck meal, everyone contributing what they could. The food was simple but made with care. The conversation was rich with humor, resilience, and an underlying current of exhaustion that never quite went away. Marcus looked around the table and saw more genuine community than he had experienced in years of wealthy networking events. These people took care of each other because the system wouldn't. They had built solidarity from necessity, but it was real in ways that privileged charity never could be. Rebecca caught his eye, and he knew she felt it too. This was what they had been missing. Before leaving Cleveland, Marcus and Rebecca arranged individual meetings with each person they had worked alongside. To Jerome, Marcus revealed his true identity and offered him a position at his company in New York, with relocation assistance, real benefits, and a wage that would actually support his family. Jerome was speechless, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Why?" he finally asked. "Why me?" Marcus gripped his shoulder. "Because you deserve it. Because your hard work and good heart shouldn't be rewarded with poverty. Because I can help, and after working beside you, I understand that helping isn't charity. It's basic decency." Jerome accepted, his hands shaking as they sealed the agreement. One life changed. Marcus was determined it wouldn't be the last. Rebecca's conversation with Lisa was equally emotional. She offered to pay for Lisa's children's education, to set up a trust that would give her family real security. "I don't understand," Lisa said, confused by this sudden windfall. Rebecca explained who she really was, why she had been there. Lisa's expression cycled through shock, anger, and finally, cautious hope. "You were testing us?" she asked. "No," Rebecca said firmly. "I was testing myself. You all taught me more in 1 month than I learned in years of charity work. You showed me what real strength looks like, what community means when it's built on necessity rather than networking." Lisa hugged her tightly, whispering thanks. Rebecca held her, knowing that this help, while life-changing for Lisa, was barely a dent in the systemic problems they had witnessed. The flight back to New York was quiet. Marcus and Rebecca sat in first class, surrounded by business travelers in expensive suits, everyone tapping on laptops and phones. The contrast with where they had just been was jarring, almost obscene. A flight attendant offered them champagne. Rebecca declined, unable to stomach the luxury, knowing that Jerome's weekly paycheck had been less than this first-class ticket cost. "We can't go back to normal," she said to Marcus. "After this, after really understanding, we can't just return to our comfortable lives and feel good about writing checks." Marcus agreed completely. "We won't," he promised. "Everything changes now. How we do business, how we engage with community, how we use our privilege, everything." Back in New York, Marcus called an emergency board meeting. He presented data from his experience, comparing his warehouse wages with company profits. The numbers were stark. His company could easily triple wages for lowest-tier workers and still be wildly profitable. "But this will affect shareholder value," one board member protested. Marcus's response was firm. "Then shareholders can leave. I'm not running a company that extracts wealth from people who can barely afford food. Either we change or I resign and make this very public." The threat worked. The board voted to restructure compensation, ensure real benefits, implement profit sharing for all employees. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Marcus knew other companies wouldn't follow without pressure. That pressure would have to be built. Rebecca threw herself into advocacy work with newfound urgency. She testified before City Council about raising minimum wage. She brought Sandra and other workers to speak at her former charity committees, giving them a platform they had never had. Some of her wealthy peers were moved and pledged support. Others dismissed her as having gone too far, becoming too radical. Rebecca didn't care anymore. She had seen behind the curtain. She knew that the system was designed to fail the majority, that poverty wasn't a personal failing, but a structural feature. Her marriage to Daniel seemed like ancient history now, a lifetime ago. She had been asleep then, comfortable in her delusions. The test Marcus had put her through had been brutal, but it had saved her from a life of empty performance. 1 year after the original test, Marcus and Rebecca returned to the cafe where it all began. They sat at the same table where Rebecca had dismissed her disguised brother so coldly. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" Marcus asked. Rebecca nodded, pain crossing her face. "I told you to go to the shelter, called you people, threatened to have you removed." She paused, gathering courage. "I remember exactly who I was that day, and I'm grateful I'm not her anymore, even though the journey to change was agonizing." Marcus reached across and took her hand. "You destroyed me," he said quietly, "but I destroyed you first. And somehow we both needed to be destroyed to be rebuilt into better versions of ourselves." A homeless man approached their table, exactly as Marcus had done a year ago. He was nervous, apologetic, asking if they could spare change for food. Rebecca and Marcus exchanged a glance. Rebecca smiled warmly at the man, making eye contact, seeing him. "Of course," she said, "but would you let us buy you breakfast instead? We'd be honored if you'd join us." The man looked shocked, uncertain if this was real. Marcus gestured to an empty chair. "Please, we insist." As the man sat down, tears in his eyes, at being treated like a human being, Marcus felt something complete inside himself. The test had destroyed them both. The journey had rebuilt them. But this moment, This simple act of dignity extended to a stranger, this was the proof that destruction had been necessary. They were no longer the people they had been, and the world was slightly better for it.